Okay, we go again. Apologies for that. I got kicked out of my own webinar, so I'm not sure quite how that works. But okay, I'll start again. Just introducing Paul Correa very quickly. A founding partner and managing director of Fiduciary Wealth Management, providing financial advice and wealth management to expats in Gibraltar, Spain, and beyond. Paul previously worked for the Inland Revenue, moved on to private banking before co-founding Fiduciary Wealth alongside his partners, the law firm Easelers, in 2007. And we also have with us today Alex Radford, bilingual lawyer, English solicitor, Spanish abogado, owner of My Lawyer in Spain, law firm acting for international clients, buying, selling, and inheriting property, as well as moving to Spain. Alex has been here in Spain for more than 30 years now. So we will crack on with the webinar. We would try and get through the content as quick as possible. We will invite questions at the end. Feel free to use the Zoom function to submit those, but we will wait till the end of the webinar to answer those. So Paul, if we can start with you, and from a Gibraltar point of view, and we have to mention Brexit straight away, I'm afraid. That's the rule these days. But post-Brexit in Gibraltar, has there been a surge in demand for residency applications, and how can someone become resident in Gibraltar?
Yes, there's been a huge demand for residency post-Brexit. I think in the last 12 months alone, there's been 400 applications for residency. Unfortunately, the Gibraltarian authorities have clamped down on residency applications because many people view residency as a conduit to get their children through university. So 400 applications, mainly from the UK, and clearly the intention is to establish residency and get the children through university without paying any tuition fees. So I think they've tightened up the rule, but yes, incredible increase in demand in the last few years. Property prices have gone up 30% in the first 9 months of the year, and I think it'll continue going up for the rest of the year. The demand for property outstrips supply. There's only 2 major developments taking place, Victoria Quays and the East Side development, both which are 3-5 years away. And in the meantime, you know, properties both for rent and to buy are snapped up really quickly. We'll talk about the treaty and how that could further impact, you know, the inflow of residency applications. But no, very, very buoyant market indeed. And with regards to your second question, you know, there's 3 types of residency. One, which is the high executive possessing specialist skills, basically an individual, a senior executive that can bring some skills to the local marketplace, which is of economic benefit to the territory. And there you pay a flat rate of tax of just under 40,000 and capped with an income of 160. So that is still available. Then you have the category 2 route, which is for individuals with net assets in excess of £2 million. And very recently, again, due to post-COVID, governments across the globe are trying to raise revenue. They've increased the minimum tax, or rather the maximum, from 37 to 45k. And thirdly, the third route to residency is self-sufficiency, which is what most people apply for, which means if you've got passive income, be that pension, savings, or investments, then because there's no capital gains tax, there's no tax on dividends, taxes on pension, if they're structured as a QROP, they only pay 2.5. That has been the preferred route to residency, but that's been they've clamped down on self-sufficiency, and there's a reason for that. Self-sufficiency was born out of the EU being part of the EU, so it had the EU approval. Once we exited the EU, this residency route has remained in place, but no longer is no longer a route, or rather has no approval whatsoever. So basically what they've said, the authorities have said that because the residency for self-sufficiency falls under the provisions of Gibraltar's Asylum and Refugee Act, and British citizens who have no material connection with the ROC because they are either non-Gibraltarian or they are from another British overseas territory, the local government continues to treat those British citizens as EU nationals for the purposes of the Refugee Act. So in essence, what it means is that in this new economic reality post-Brexit, British nationals are treated as EU nationals and until they change the law, which they appear reluctant to do, at least for now. And there's only two ways of circumventing the impediments. One is if you're a UK national and you transfer your medical rights from the NHS to the Gibraltar Health Authority, or two, if you register self-employed. And both, particularly the second one, allows you to tinker on the edges and find ways and routes to obtain residency through self-sufficiency. But there's an election coming, and all the politicians from the opposition and from government are making noises that they might want to get more tax out of those individuals that manage to qualify on those two conditions for self-sufficiency. So things are changing, Matt, but yes, the market is very buoyant.
Okay, great. Thank you, Paul. And Alex, we'll turn to you then. So you and I both live in Spain. We can see why many people want to live in Spain. How do people looking to gain Spanish residency, how do they go about that?
Okay, so depending on the nationality of the person wishing to apply for residency in Spain, that will affect where they apply from. So, for example, if you're an EU national, once you spend more than 3 months in Spain, then you've got to apply for residency, and you apply for that from the UK. So we're acting for lots of former Brits who have exchanged their British passport for European passports. They're coming out to Spain, and we're applying for their residency here in Spain. The other route is basically non-Europeans. Brits now, of course, are considered as non-Europeans. They have to apply for residency from their home consulates in the UK. So basically, if you're planning to retire to Spain with a non-lucrative visa, you have to apply for your and you're a non-European, you apply for that residency from your consulate, Spanish consulate, wherever you live. So we are, not just saying Brits, but we are acting for Canadians, Americans, people from Australia and the Middle East moving to Spain, and we're helping them with those non-lucrative visas from their home countries. And then if you've got deep pockets and you can afford to buy a property of more than 500,000 euros in your name only, then you can apply for what's known as the golden visa, and that actual visa can be applied for from either your home country or from Spain. And we'd always recommend that you actually apply for it from Spain, because here we submit the documentation online and it's granted for 2 years as opposed to 1 year if you applied for it from your home country. So that's basically the routes to residency, Matt.
Okay, wonderful. And then back to Gibraltar. So Paul, there was, I say recently or some time ago now, a tax agreement with Spain, which is some people may find unusual because of old tensions. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the international double taxation agreement, in principle, although if you look at the formats, it doesn't follow OECD rules because they're pretty standard. The clauses are all the same. You just change the countries and the rest stays pretty much unchanged. But no, it has some political undertones, but effectively it was signed on the 4th of March 2019. It became law on the 4th of March 2021, and it was an agreement, a cooperation agreement in the field of taxation and protection of financial interests. So the
connection.
Sorry, what's happening there?
I think there's just someone in the background. It should be okay now. Go for it. Yeah.
Okay, so the effect of this treaty is that non-Spanish nationals who spend more than one complete tax year in Spain and then decide to move to Gibraltar will remain Spanish tax resident for the year in which they have applied and for further subsequent tax years. So it makes it very difficult to extract yourself from Spanish residency once you are there for one complete tax year. So if you're moving from the UK and you're undecided where to go, becoming tax resident in Spain first and then coming to Gib is not really workable. And then the other issue to consider is that the agreement is wide-ranging, and it also touches on the schemes that I mentioned, the 3 residency routes: HEPS, Cat2, and self-sufficiency. And basically what they've said, notwithstanding that these residency routes are available, it doesn't mean that the Spanish tax authorities will necessarily accept that someone is tax resident in Gibraltar based on HEPS, Cat2, or self-sufficiency, purely on the basis that they have a certificate. So it can be challenged. So if you are resident in Gibraltar for a short period of time, but then spend most of your time in Spain, then Spain will challenge your residency. I think that is the crux of the matter, that you can't, like in bygone years, have a residence in Gibraltar, but actually have your family, your wife and your children attending, an international school in Marbella or in Soto Grande. You will be challenged, and the Gibraltar tax authorities recognize that the residency certificate in itself is not enough to claim for residency. So you're subject to the 2 things that we all know in Spain, which is the 183-day rule and the Centre of Economic and Vital Interest. So if you trigger any of those, you're deemed to be tax resident in Spain, notwithstanding that you've got that certificate.
Great.
Well, let's just clarify that, okay? Because some countries the tax years are run differently. So in Spain, they run a logical tax year, January to December. So if someone spends more than 183 nights in Spain, they become Spanish tax resident here. And of course, Spain will want to tax you therefore on worldwide assets and income, regardless of that Gibraltarian certificate that you may have.
Absolutely.
And apart from just spending the nights there, you might have husband working in Gibraltar, but family in Spain. So it's basically, where's your centre of economic interest and where do you habitually reside, and where are your spouse, where's your spouse and children? And you're right, they look at the tax authorities here will look at where someone will go to, someone's kids will go to school. So yeah, someone might be working in Gibraltar, spending most of his life or her life there, but if their children are at school in Marbella, then they'll attach tax residency. So it's quite difficult to get rid of tax residency, really, even if you're working or living in Gibraltar.
No, what is surprising is that both countries recognize the fact that Spain has its own tax rules that need to be respected, because most double taxation agreements, take Spain with Andorra and so on, doesn't go into chapter and verse. But then in this particular instance, what they're saying is, don't try to pretend you're a tax resident in Gibraltar and be in Spain, because we're not going to give you any refuge in Gibraltar. You might have your certificate, but if you breach residency in Spain, you know what? The tax authorities are going to cooperate.
Yeah.
So I think it makes it crystal clear. There's no room for disagreement, because both jurisdictions accept the principle that there's some rules in Spain to observe.
So how many days do I have to spend in Gibraltar to become a resident?
I'll cover it in one of the questions, but you have to spend in either 183 days or 100 days or 300 days over 3 tax years. In other words, on an average, 100 days every year for 3 years. That either of those 2 conditions make you ordinarily resident, with a caveat that doesn't mean that you don't trigger residency in Spain or the UK through the UK statutory residency test, depending on the ties you have with the UK. Nowadays, it's, a residency certificate is not the trump card that you flash and you say, no, I'm resident here. You will get challenged if you're playing the game. And as you know, Alex, you're long in the tooth as I am, and some people do like to play the game and pretend they're here or there, and they're nowhere. Yeah, but those days are long gone, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Yeah.
No, yeah, I think that's a real kind of takeaway from that. In the past, people may have got away with those sort of things, but nowadays it's so much difficult to do so, and people need to do things properly. So, Alex, back to you. You mentioned about the visas earlier, something now Brits have to contend with, and you mentioned the non-lucrative visa and the golden visa, and of course the golden visa involves an investment in Spain. Apart from that, are there any major differences between the two routes?
Yeah. So basically, if we kind of go back almost 10 years, when Spain was going through a horrible recession, and most of the property in Spain was owned by the banks, the Spanish government then introduced the golden visa legislation to attract investors from outside of Europe. And never did we think at that time in 2013 that basically it would apply to Brits following Brexit, but in fact it does. So basically, if one person buys property or properties over the value of 500,000 euros, and that value has to be in the deed, not, I bought it 10 years ago and now it's worth 500,000. It has to be actually in the deed. Then basically they can apply for the golden visa. And as I mentioned earlier, we'd apply for that from Spain, and you get the visa granted for 2 years. The benefits of the golden visa is that you can actually work in Spain with the golden visa, whereas the non-lucrative visa is only really to retire to Spain for. You're not allowed to work. And in fact, if you go to the appointment at the consulates in your home country, wherever you apply for that a non-lucrative visa, the authorities there will ask you whether or not you're going to work. So you've got to prove to them that you won't be working, and that you've got sufficient financial resources to live on. And typically, a single applicant would require 27,000 euros in their bank account. That can be a combination of pension income, savings, or income from renting properties out, for example, but it can't be income from working. A family of four would basically, well, each dependent is typically around 7,000 euros. So a family of four, you're looking at about 45,000 euros in a bank account, or monies there available to prove to the authorities that you can live in Spain. And that really is it, Matt. That's the main difference. Golden visa, you can work in Spain. You've got to buy that property more than 500,000 in the name of one person only. And non-lucrative visa, basically you can't work. And the process or the documentation is similar. You need a medical certificate confirming you're not suffering from any World Health Organization nasty illnesses. You've got a clean criminal record certificate, medical insurance in place if you're under the age of 65. If you're over the age of 65, there may be a double treaty between Spain and your country, which means you can plug into healthcare. If not, private medical insurance from a Spanish provider. And you prepare all that documentation, and then depending whether it's a non-lucrative visa, you'd submit that to the consulate in your country. And then if it's a golden visa, we would submit that online here.
Okay, wonderful. And just one thing to pick up on that, Alex, because I know you emphasize the point with the golden visa, that the 500K has got to be invested in one person's name only. And that's where people make a mistake, don't they? Because if Mr. and Mrs. Smith buy a property for, say, €500,000, that only counts as 250 per person. Is that right? And therefore wouldn't qualify?
Exactly. That's exactly right. So we have come across situations whereby clients have already bought a property. They come to us asking about residency, and we say, send us the deeds through, and it's in the name of both of them, which just doesn't work. So one of the services we offer up front is if someone's considering buying a property, let's talk about ownership options. Are you going to move to Spain? If you're going to move to Spain, then obviously buy it in your names. However, if it's more than 500,000, then buy it in the name of one of you only. If, for example, you're going to buy it as a holiday home, then potentially you could buy it in the names of your children, and that basically will help mitigate inheritance tax, certainly if you're a UK national in the UK and also in Spain. 17 different autonomous regions in Spain. We've got our head offices in Marbella, and we've got offices throughout Spain. But for example, in Andalusia, the inheritance tax allowances are quite generous between direct heirs, so mum and dad to each other, down to the children. Not so generous when it comes to across to brothers and sisters. But basically, it's really worth having a discussion and considering how to mitigate inheritance tax. Between spouses here in Spain, in Andalusia, you're talking €1 million allowance, a 99% discount after that. But for example, up in the very popular Costa Blanca region, which is part of the Valencian region, the inheritance tax rates there vary, and you've only got a personal allowance between direct heirs of €100,000. So inheritance tax can kind of, catch up on you quite quickly if you don't do some careful tax planning.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. And Paul, so when people think about the Gibraltar, they often think about the border with Spain and what's happening kind of post-Brexit. So there's been talks and a possible treaty between the EU, GIB, and the UK. What's happening with that?
Well, I think the British Gibraltarian contingent, as well as the EU Spanish contingent, have been tight-lipped because it's a highly politicized treaty involving many different areas, and there's been very few leaks, if any. So all we know is that the discussions and negotiations are progressing positively, that there's goodwill on both sides, but clearly there's a few red lines. Gibraltar on the one hand want, and the British want two things, to stimulate economic growth, and that there's fluidity at that Gibraltar-Spanish border. So fluidity and the economy. And on the Spanish side, they want job opportunities clearly for Spanish cross-border workers. They want to make the whole region benefit from any agreement, pretty much like Monaco and France, where there's a fluidity and there's growth for the hinterland as well. And clearly for Spain, there's the political, element as well that they try and bring into the equation. So apparently the red lines, from what we hear, could have something to do, but this is just hearsay, with the UK authorities wanting to ring fence their naval assets or the assets here, military assets, and for Gibraltar, it's all about sovereignty as well. So I think they're progressing well, and if there's a treaty, then Gibraltar will effectively join Schengen, not the EU, but they'll join Schengen. So they would restore pre-Brexit the position that a lot of people in Gibraltar had, which was, or Brits as well, that in fact, the UK was not part of Schengen. So we've gone one step ahead. So we're not part of the EU, but on the other hand, we can travel freely through the Schengen zone without visas. Not only that, when it comes to queuing, it's the fast lane. So you can imagine how beneficial that would be for business. But I think what will happen is, if there's a treaty, it'll be a boon for Gibraltar. I think a lot of pent-up demand, Brits that are considering coming across, and if they know that they've lost the freedom to move more freely within the EU, and they can regain that by moving to sunnier climes, the pound still reigns supreme, English law, the security and safety of knowing that it's a British territory, and then they can move freely, then of course it's a no-brainer. I think it's going to be a boon for Gibraltar personally. But I think watch this space the next 3 months to see whether they can iron out one or two issues, because I think they're close. The noises coming from both camps, without giving anything away, is that they're pretty close.
Yeah, and they, as far as I can see, Paul, I think there is motivation from both sides to come to an agreement, which I think is the first step. So we're getting there.
Surprisingly enough, it is, because it's always been very acrimonious. That the relationship has always been, not friendly all the time, right? But this time round, I think common sense and pragmatism have guided the discussions and the negotiations over the treaty. I think all sides want to do put a treaty in place where all sides derive some economic benefits and some advantages. But of course, on the other hand, there's the delicate issue of the EU, and for a non-EU territory to be part of Schengen, being outside the EU, they don't want their rules trampled with. It's the same with the Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland agreements. Yeah, it's a delicate one, always very delicate.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. So Alex, you did mention the importance of tax planning. You spoke about inheritance taxes as well. And to be honest, in my experience, we see people move and they're so excited about relocating to sunnier climates. They forget. So why is the tax planning so important for someone who's moving to Spain?
Well, but basically, you can certainly mitigate inheritance tax. And if you're moving, say, from the UK or from another country, and you're going to move to Spain and spend more than 183 nights here in Spain, then you become a tax resident here and will pay tax in Spain on worldwide assets and income. So it is important, I believe, that someone who is considering that move to take advice, have maybe a tax calculation prepared for them on what they could potentially pay here in Spain on tax. And also because they're leaving their current jurisdiction, and a lot of their financial products may no longer be open to them because they cease to be a resident of that country. So, for example, in the UK, a clear one is ISAs. You've got to be a resident in the UK to benefit from ISAs. As soon as you move from the UK to elsewhere, and you cease to become a UK tax resident, then those ISAs won't apply for you, and then you'll lose those tax benefits. So I think you've got to take off your kind of UK tax planning glasses and put on your new Spanish glasses, and take advice locally.
Wonderful. And the same with the planning in Gibraltar, Paul. So Gibraltar is wonderful for taxes. There's no inheritance tax, no capital gains tax. So I say to you, well, there's no point in tax planning if you move into Gibraltar. Now, I know that statement is wrong, but tell me why that is.
Well, it's absolutely wrong. Let me give you 3 reasons why it's wrong. And you're right. Gibraltar offers a very benign tax environment, and there's a lot of benefits. There's no question about that. But no tax environment is foolproof. We can go through different ones. The one in Portugal, non-habitual residency, where capital gains tax rates apply, whether it's through non-habitual or otherwise. So there's always weaknesses, in the schemes. And with Gibraltar, for a British national who exits the UK and comes to Gibraltar, I'll give you 3 reasons why it's not foolproof. Let's say that they've accrued UK pension benefits during their time in the UK, and they're looking to transfer their UK pension into a Gibraltar CUROPS. Well, this creates in the UK a benefit crystallization event. And you have a lifetime allowance, which is currently 1,073,100, which I think the Chancellor of the Exchequer has frozen for until 2026. And pensions values have grown exponentially in the last 10, 20 years. So anything in excess of 1,073,000, if you draw down your pension, a benefit crystallization event, and it exceeds the lifetime allowance of 1 million and a bit, then anything you draw as income is tax charged at 25%. If you take the whole thing as a lump sum, then you pay tax at the rate of 55%, right? So if you're a British national whose accrued pension benefits are just below that threshold of 1,073,000, and you're looking to exit the UK, you might as well transfer it to a CUROPS. That would be deemed a benefit crystallization event. But if you do it before the value of your pensions exceeds the allowance, which is tax-free, then you effectively transfer all your UK pensions into a Gibraltar CUROPS. There's no lifetime charge because it's below the threshold, below the allowance. And then that pension will grow unhindered in Gibraltar without being subject to lifetime allowance. So that's one way you can make a considerable saving. The second way, the second point I would say is that whilst there's no inheritance tax in Gibraltar, you are still likely to be UK domiciled for UK IHT purposes, because in the UK, domicile is based on your country of birth and your father's country of birth, and the ties you have with the UK. And even though after 5 complete years of non-UK tax residency, you could claim a domicile of choice, it is always fraught with difficulty. And I don't think this webinar gives us enough time to explain that in detail. But essentially what it is you've got ties with the UK, you're UK domicile for IHT, you have to take steps. There's no Gibraltar inheritance tax, but you have to assume that you're UK domicile for IHT purpose, and therefore structure your wealth in such a way which mitigates UK inheritance tax, because it would be subject, IHT would be, you'd be subject to IHT on your worldwide assets. So I think that's a really important one, and one that Brits often forget. And I think the third one is the UK statutory residency test, 2013. You exit the UK and you do it by the book on the 5th of April, end of the tax year. You rub your hands, textbook, everything's done properly. But then, you've got, I don't know, you've got elderly parents in the UK, you've got children in the UK. One of the spouses suffers from ill health. And what do? You go back to the UK. And then you pay lip service to the UK statutory residency test, which, depending on the ties you have with the UK, determines how many days you can trip back into the UK in any UK tax year, right? And what do? Inadvertently re-trigger UK tax residency, and you get challenged, and you're therefore liable in the UK for tax. So I think, whether it's UK domicile, UK residency being re-triggered through the UK statutory residency test, or the lifetime allowance limits, there's very good reasons why, as Alex alluded to before, you should really get tax advice in Gibraltar and not assume that this is a tax haven and there's no tax to pay, because that would be a very big mistake.
Absolutely wonderful. And you mentioned the QROPs there, Paul, and just very quickly, you have someone relocating to Gibraltar. They have a UK pension. They're paying what, 20% plus income tax on their pension income. For those who don't know, tell us how much tax you pay on a Gibraltar QROPs.
Well, you would pay 2.5%, a flat rate of 2.5%. So
yeah,
again, it's a no-brainer, right? Because think about 17.5%. So for an individual who's drawing, to simplify, is drawing 100,000 a year in pension, and rather than paying 20,000 in tax, now pays 2,500. There's a net saving of 17,500 every year.
Yeah, and more, because I guess their tax rate is higher.
Absolutely.
So the planning, no matter where you move to, it's important to plan, because the taxation is completely different to what we're used to in the UK. So Alex, back to you. I know from living in Spain, kind of before the cutoff line, after Brexit was announced, there was a surge of Brits gaining their residency in Spain, maybe those who are kind of under the radar before. But what about post-Brexit? Are we seeing more or less Brits coming across? Are there, apart from the need for a visa, are there major changes that Brits need to be aware of?
So yeah, but basically, we were very busy in the lead up to Brexit, and I thought, okay, we'll get all these residencies in place. I think the last person that applied came, approached us and instructed us on the 15th of December, and we managed to get their residency application in before the end of the year, which is really quite good. And whenever I see that lady, she thanks me profusely, because a lot of people didn't get that. So yeah, so there's a massive surge up to Brexit, and then afterwards we thought, that would be it. We'd already been acting for non-Europeans and applying for residency, particularly Americans and Canadians, so we were very familiar with the rules, and the non-lucrative visa is quite popular with people retiring to Spain from outside the EU. And Spain basically didn't introduce any special legislation for Brits. Why should they? Because in effect they already had legislation in place dealing with non-Europeans, so they just treated Brits as non-Europeans, and the process was the non-lucrative visa and the golden visa requirements that I alluded to earlier. So Brits now are using those requirements to get into Spain, and actually we've noticed a very steady amount of people still wishing to relocate to Spain, to new people, most of them taking out the non-lucrative visa, and then a lot of people who had bought prior to Brexit or have since bought, buying properties for more than half a million euros, then applying for the golden residency. So yeah, it's it's busy days. We've the team before Brexit was two of us, and then post Brexit there's four of us. So that gives you an indication of how busy we have become. Of course, there are other visas in the pipeline. They are talking about, Spain's talking about maybe introducing a digital nomad visa. So we're waiting for more updates about that. That could be quite interesting. And there's the self-employed work visa. So there are other visas available. They take longer to obtain. But the major change post Brexit was really that Brits now aren't allowed to spend more than 90 days in a 180-day period in Spain. So yeah, same rules apply to non-Europeans. And if you're renting your property as a Brit before Brexit, you would pay 19% tax on the income, and sorry, you would pay 24% tax on the income, and the costs of the rental, so water, electric, insurance, would be deductible. Post Brexit, those costs aren't deductible. So in effect, you're paying 24% plus the costs. So that's a bit of a dampener, but there are ways to mitigate that tax liability.
Okay.
Can I interject, Matt, and go off script and ask Alex a question which interests me? You about 2 weeks ago, Andalusia scrapped Spanish wealth tax, only for the national government to reintroduce it countrywide, we believe, just last week. What's that all about? Because most Brits are, confused by this the Andalusian right-wing government scrapping it, the left-wing national government introducing it, okay, with a higher threshold, but throughout the country. Yeah. Is that correct or not?
Yeah, that's correct. And that's why I think it's important, what I mentioned earlier, is that if you're moving to Spain, depending on the region you're moving to, talk to a local advisor, a tax advisor, and get a tax simulation about the taxes that you could potentially end up paying in Spain, and consider how to mitigate those. And I'd suggest that process starts 6 months, at least 6 months before you move to Spain. And you're right. What happened is we've got 17 autonomous regions, and again, the wealth tax varies according to region, but in Andalusia, typically it was 700,000 euros plus 300,000. So if you had assets of more than €1 million, you would pay wealth tax on an annual basis, and that was a sliding scale. But you'd have wealth tax here in Andalusia, and then you'd always have a top-up tax of wealth tax applied at national level. So in effect, there was two calculations. Andalusia has been doing really well, I'd say, in reducing taxation generally. So, for example, purchasing a property in Andalusia, you used to have to pay 8, 9, 10% tax on a property purchase, depending on the value. That now, for second-hand property, has been reduced to 7%. So that was a good move. And stamp duty on new properties was reduced from 1.5% to 1.2%. So that is all positive. However, what we are seeing is, yes, right-wing government in Seville introducing these tax changes and breaks for the wealth tax, but then in effect, down at national level, socialist government, they are not happy with that, so they are introducing higher taxes. And that threshold, I believe, starts at 3 million. So the threshold has actually increased from 1 million euros to 3 million euros. So yeah, basically that's answered Paul's question, Matt. We can move on to the next one if you like.
Okay, no problem. No, I think we lost connection there. So both my screen froze and Paul's disappeared for now. So I think he's trying to rejoin us, but he's coming back here. So as Paul reconnects, Alex, you've lived in Spain for 30 plus years. What do you love the most about Spain?
I think, I was in the UK last week, and, turned up on, the plane opened up, walking down the steps. It was drizzling, it was grey. And I just thought, oh, this is miserable. I love the blue sky, sunshine. I miss English people. I miss their humour. We've got some great friends and family, obviously, living here in Spain too. But yeah, I miss the UK. But living in Spain, blue skies every day, good food, good wine, lots. This is a great city, great place. Marbella, very international where we live. Spain, I've travelled extensively across Spain. Love visiting all the different islands, different cultures in those islands, and the gastronomy. Amazing. It changes from region to region. So yeah, what is there not to like about Spain?
That's a very good answer. Very good answer. And Paul, I've got one last question for you, but you've kind of answered this already. So you can go off piste and tell us something else if you want. Tell us how much you love Gibraltar if you'd like.
No. I will repeat the same answer, but I'll be very brief. The double taxation agreement talks about 183 days a year to be Gibraltar tax resident. It is in fact the lower of the two. It's either 183 days per year or 300 days over 3 consecutive tax years. In other words, 100 days every year for 3 years to be deemed ordinary resident. It's the lower of the two that qualifies you as a tax resident and is unlikely to be challenged by Spain, so long as you don't trigger Spanish residency. We already covered that. So it's very simple, really. Those are the requirements. Nothing too complicated. Just be wary of your travel schedule and how much time you spend in Spain or UK or any third country.
Yeah, no. So that's when people come to us and say, look, can I be resident in Gibraltar, get all those great tax benefits, but I want to limit my time there. They need to be careful of, they spend the minimum amount of times in Gibraltar, and they have to be careful not to trigger tax residency in another country, the UK, Spain, or elsewhere.
There's something I haven't mentioned, Matt, and I think it's really, really important for the listeners. Post-Brexit and in the last 12 months, they have tightened the rules, as I said, regarding self-sufficiency. Because British nationals were deemed EU nationals under the Asylum and Refugee Act, and they haven't amended the law. And because self-sufficiency was born out of the EU, the EU gave approval to that scheme, and they're not prepared to change it. It's becoming increasingly difficult for British nationals to establish their residency here on self-sufficiency rules where you pay minimal tax. So if anyone is still considering that, so long as they meet the other two conditions I mentioned earlier, they really need to get proper advice and be in good hands, because they're never going to get residency otherwise. The requirements and the loops they have to go through and how long it takes it's changed. Before you could obtain residency in 4 weeks, now it can take up to 12 weeks, provided that you know what you're doing. So don't be too clever. Come here, and if you're planning to come to Gibraltar, then make sure that you're in good hands and you get proper advice, and you're dealing with a professional firm that can get the residency for you in record time and deal with all the tax issues surrounding residency as well, not just the certificate. Yeah, that everything is under one roof,
and done properly as well.
And done properly, of course.
Perfect. And then Alex, just finishing off with you. So just give us a little bit of information. When do you become a tax resident in Spain? What triggers that? And you guys deal with, the property purchase process in Spain. How long does that take? Is there any restrictions on getting a mortgage?
Yeah, so post-Brexit, no restrictions on getting a mortgage for a property purchase, and the property purchase process is exactly the same for Europeans, non-Europeans, and the costs of the process are the same as well. So depending on the region, obviously it's important to just check out the local taxation that you're going to pay on the property purchase when you buy. But for example, in Andalusia, that's 7%, and up in the Valencian region, it's 10%, and it varies across the other regions. Mortgages, before you actually purchase a property or come out to view properties, I'd recommend that you speak to an independent mortgage broker, furnish them with your financial information, and let them tell you how much you'd be able to borrow, and therefore what kind of property you'd be able to buy. So I'd certainly do that beforehand. Does that answer all your questions?
No, that's what I mean. I think there was one bit we missed. When do you become tax resident
tax
in
resident.
Spain?
Yes.
So
yeah. So tax resident in Spain, basically, when you spend more than 183 nights in Spain. So if you move to Spain now, obviously you're not going to become a tax resident because there's less than 3 months left in the year. So you wouldn't become a Spanish tax resident. So more than 183 nights in a tax year from January to December. And the purchase process takes up to 12 weeks.
wonderful. Thank you. Okay, well, that's great. Well, we've come to the end of the webinar. A couple of IT hitches there, but we got there in the end, and some great information from both of you. So thank you. We go to the question and answers. We've got one question there so far, which I guess shows that you guys explained everything perfectly. So well done there. So we have a quick question from Matthew. Do you have contacts for obtaining residency correctly?
Who is it
So,
addressed to?
It doesn't say. So Matthew, I don't know if you're referring to Gibraltar or Spain on there, but I think you should reach out to us directly.
Yeah,
and we can help you with that.
yeah. If it's Spanish residency, then Matthew should be speaking to Alex, and if it's Gibraltar residency, we handle that process. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So Matthew, if you want to drop us an email at inquiries@fwm.gi if it's relating to Gibraltar. If not, we'll pass you on to Alex, and I'm sure Alex will be more than happy to help you with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and for more information about the residency process, we've got a specialist website called getspanishresidency.com, or you can contact me by email, which is aradford@mylawyerinspain.com.
Okay, wonderful. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today. If there's any kind of content that you missed, we will be hosting the webinar on our YouTube channel. Feel free to go there. Please like, share, and subscribe, because we'll be doing more webinars. I'm sure Alex will be doing webinars himself as well, and there's always interesting information on there. So Alex and Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for answering all the questions, and for everyone who joined us, have a lovely day, and I'm sure we'll speak to some of you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye. Bye.